you a language for that. Um, we learned to start out that way. All the special effects were done. That blood was actually chocolate syrup, if anybody was wondering. We have a ridiculous amount of fun making them. So, with that, I'll turn it over to Sapphire. And Sapphire, if you want to ask our first question of the day to the group.
Sure. So, with the subject of tonight being community change, we like when we were considering how to do the presentation. One thing I really thought about was like representation, and so the question is, what communities do you feel you identify with? They can be anything from what type of disability you have to the disability community as a whole to being a Black woman, a white woman. So like what communities do you feel you belong to?
Yeah. And when people are thinking, we'd like to hear from everybody, but we realize that, yeah, everybody is in a different place. But the reason we wanted to emphasize this is also because as people with disabilities, that's what brings us to this Zoom, is we identify there. But very often in those spaces, we forget the intersectionality that exists within each of us. So we want to be an intersectional organization and we want to have intersectional programming, but we're intersectional people. So it's not just our disability experience that we bring to these spaces. We also bring everything else we identify with to it as an asset and as a culture and who we are. So, but we don't talk about it and share that as much as we probably should. So this is a space to have that conversation. Is there somebody that would like to go first?
Yeah, this is Shika. I can go first.
Yeah, Shika, the floor is.
I usually am around other people that are blind or visually impaired because I can relate with them. And then also my family or friends. So like the um Asian community or like people at like church or at work, I guess.
I know. Thank you. And thank you for going first. There's leadership in that, putting yourself out there. So we appreciate that as well. Uh, Anybody else want to share? Let's hear from as many people as we can. All right. And in the spirit, while people are deciding, Sapphire and I. All right. Yeah, I see a hand up. Alice City? Is that how you
I
pronounce
didn't
it?
mean to. Yeah, you said it just fine. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, that's right. I was gonna just say, and this is kind of a in the April youth DNA. For a long time, as presenters, we're never gonna ask you to do anything that we're not willing to do ourselves. So I was gonna jump in and do mine, but I'll do it right after you, Alice City. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think that what I would say that it's a kind of confusing question for me. Not confusing, but I guess it's a question that I've never thought about, and it was a good question. I have a disability, but it's an invisible disability. So sometimes I don't fit in certain disability communities. I'm African American, and in school, like growing up and in high school, things like that, I didn't really fit in certain groups, ethnicity groups, or minority groups. I didn't fit in those groups either. But now that I'm older and I'm a mom and I work and I'm a businesswoman, I would say I would fit in a multi-community. I fit in the motherhood, a young motherhood community, and then I also fit in the community of a working mom.
All right, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And as promised, I'll go next. So again, my name is Michael Beers. I identify as a biracial person, being Native, and also a person that is adopted. Me and my four siblings were all adopted, which brings its own set of perspective. I also identify as a performer. I've done stand-up comedy for over 20 years now, which is hard to believe. I got started in high school. And yeah, and as an advocate. So I think those are when I think about it, those are the communities I like to represent, especially when I'm in spaces like this. Anyone else?
I'll go.
Yeah.
I would say that when it comes to disability identity, I feel the most in community and like cross disability spaces. I have a couple of different disabilities that kind of show themselves in different ways. So I feel most belonging with other folks in that same boat. And then I also am queer. So that's another identity that's pretty important to me.
Right on. Thank you so much.
I'll go last to let everybody go,
All
so
right.
that you guys can enjoy it and like have fun and like
All
really.
right. Sapphire's gonna take the headlining spot. I like it. All right, Andy, I see your hand. Well, it's not your hand, it's a little yellow one, but go ahead.
Here, you can see my hand for real.
There you go. All right.
I identify as being a part of the community of people with reading disabilities. I identify with my ADHD diagnosis. If anyone knows the TikTok account that refers to it as Dave, I really vibe with that. The community based around that meme.
Yeah.
I identify with the queer community as someone who expresses gender fluidly and is bi. I also have community around some of the cultural things that I've inherited from my Latino side. Yeah.
Thank you, Andy. And let's see, we got more hands up. Enora, am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, you're pronouncing it right.
Absolutely. The floor is yours.
All right. So for me, I do karaoke outside of this. So I belong to the community of my bar where I do karaoke at.
Nice.
I'm also an artist, so I definitely belong to the artist community, and I post my art on TikTok. So artists of TikTok or whatever. And when I was in foster care, I used to go to different powwows and volunteer at them, as I'm also Native American. But as I've gotten older, it's kind of hard to be involved with the Native American community. But as far as disability wise, probably mental health community, because my disability has to deal mainly with my mental health. So
Thank you, Enora. Absolutely. All right, Lavender, the floor is yours.
When I think about the communities that I identify with most strongly from an identity perspective, definitely, I think my identity with the disabled community is also multifaceted because I also have invisible disabilities. So I really strongly identify with the neurodivergent community because I too am diagnosed with Dave. As Andy said, I also very much appreciate Connor DeWolf. He makes good content. ADHD and autistic, and then I am also hypermobile and probably have POTS. And then on top of that, also the queer and trans communities, because I am queer and also non-binary.
So thank you, Lavender. And let's go to Jeremiah. Floor is yours.
So some of the communities I feel like I identify with is like the disability of like like a head injury or something. I'm not really sure what to call it. It's like an indivisible disability because uh I wasn't born with it. It was given to me from like an accident or stuff and like so stuff like that. And then I also feel like I identify with the LDS church because I'm really big into that and really big with that religion.
Right on. All right, thank you, Jeremiah. Ash, the floor is yours.
Some of the identities I'm part of, cross disability community at large. For my specific disabilities, the deaf and hard of hearing community, and also neurodivergent community with other ADHD folks. And then I also have mental health disabilities, so like connecting with other folks who who have similar struggles. And then I'm also part of the queer and trans community and the Filipino community.
Thank you, Ash. All right, Rachel, the floor is yours.
My name is Rachel, and I identify with the invisible disabilities community. I was diagnosed with autism when I was like in 6th grade. And I also would say I identify with like learning disabilities. I haven't been diagnosed with this yet, but there's this chance that I have it, is that math learning disability called dyscalculia. And then I think also, and I'm hoping to get a diagnosis for it because I feel like I'm starting to notice this as well as I get older. There's a possibility that I might have ADHD and maybe OCD.
All right. Well, thank you, Rachel. Yeah, and good luck. Way to be self-aware, and good luck on that journey. Finding those things out. Anybody else would like to share the communities you identify with, disability and otherwise?
I can go. This is Naomi. I identify with a multitude of disabilities, and I'm not going to name them all because we'd be here all day. But I identify as being a dancer, a singer. I am really into the dog community, which is really funny, but I'm with dogs most of my time.
Yeah.
So an avid dog advocate. And obviously advocacy has been huge. I also was a teacher for almost 11 years and have continued doing private tutoring. So yeah, that's just a little splurge.
All right, thank you, Naomi. Anyone else? I know Abby, you're busy. But Riley, as well as Erica, if you guys want to jump in as well, like all are welcome to.
I was just about to ask, did anybody else want to go?
I could totally go. I identify as, I'm a woman. I consider myself part of that community. I identify as having both visible and non-visible disabilities. And I identify, I guess, as part of the crowd that have like really niche special interests that like not everyone gets. So
I know, I like that description. That sounds. Thank you.
My name is Erica. I'm disabled. I'm a woman, and I work in the entertainment industry. So I guess that could be a community I identify with.
Right. Thank you.
I'm Abby. I have spent all of COVID doing all kinds of identity discovery and figuring out like who the hell I am when I haven't had the energy to do it when I was, working outside of my house
Mhm.
40 hours a week. So I'm queer, I'm non-binary. I also very currently identify as really thankful to Erica or Riley or whoever hit play on the recording when I definitely forgot. So thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm disabled, neurodivergent. I'm a Twitch streamer, found a lot of community on Twitch on the internet. And that's kind of me.
Right on. That's a great you, Abby. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else before Sapphire like just brings it home? Is there anybody else? Right, and this is kind of ongoing. We might move on. But if somebody that hasn't shared, wants to at any point, please let us know. That also goes for like questions and comments. Like Sapphire and I will be checking in with you from time to time. But if you're overwhelmed with like a comment or an idea or like a fresh take, rather than like waiting for us to say, okay, this is the time, go ahead and get our attention in the chat, throw up a yellow hand. Because I, for one, as a student, always was the one that had the question like right away, but then the teacher would be like, oh, you have to save it till the end. And one of two things happened. Like I either concentrated so hard on remembering the question, I like tuned out everything else the teacher said, or I listened to what they said, and by the end, the teacher would say, all right, Mike, what was your question? I'd be like, because I forgot it. So we don't want to miss out on that brilliance or those ideas. So this is a very conversational presentation. So we want to get those as they come. So without any further ado, Sapphire, would you like to tell us what you identify?
Just to add to that, I am watching the chat and watching for hands, so I'll be able to hopefully catch anybody that has any questions, raise any hands, or have anything in the chat. Okay, so I identify as a biracial woman. I identify across the disability community, both with visible and invisible disabilities. I identify as in the academia community as a college student. And finally, I identify in the, which didn't get everybody, I identify in the Disney community as a Disney adult. So
Right. Right on. All right. Well, thank you, Sapphire. All right. And like we said, this is an ongoing conversation, but we're gonna go on. So today's main topic is community. And when Sapphire and I were when we met on this platform, a year ago when Sapphire was in the class and I was the one presenting, we had a really good discussion with that group, and it's been ongoing and evolving about community, not in the sense that a lot of us get introduced to it in independent living. So when we say community living, a lot of times people are talking about the apartment that you're trying to get, or the transportation that you're trying to access. But the community we're going to focus on more for this discussion is the social community, the group of people that holds you up and has your back in your life. And that said, a common barrier, because we all have different disabilities, and just like we discussed right now, we all identify as different things aside from the disability community. And even if we have the same diagnosis as 4 other people on this Zoom, we are 4 individuals and have, that the same diagnosis does not mean that we experience that diagnosis the same way. But there are common threads, and those common threads that we share as a community of people with disabilities is what makes up the culture that we live in and the culture that we experience through programs like this, through the April conference is a big, to me, represents a lot of the culture. And for anybody experiencing that for the first time in a couple of weeks, I'm very excited for you. But two of the things that when Sapphire and I talk, and when we opened it up last year, that a lot of the people in that class really identified with was the idea that loneliness and lack of confidence are two things that almost all of us share as people with disabilities, whether it's for a moment, whether it's pretty much all the time. So what are we doing as a community to address those things? Just because we can get you an apartment, we can get you transportation, but if you don't have a social network around you that cares that you have a car and that you have a place to live, that those are kind of the motivations for why we do those other things. I don't have a job just because I wanted a job. I want a job and I want to make money because I want to be around people and I want to go do things. So rather than discussing it as a linear, like first you got to do this, then you got to do this, then you can have a social life, and then you can do these things. Community really happens all at the same time. So you have to address these things. So when we talk about creating and responding to community, we wanted to introduce the idea of audience-based programming. So, so many times when we get in spaces like this, especially if you're working with a center or working with programs, everybody wants to talk about evidence-based programming, which is great. We love our scientists. We love those evidence-based programming. But you're not going to inherently, it's hard to address something that's not being addressed if you're only addressing stuff that has evidence. So audience-based programming is means that you're responding to what your audience is telling you. So think about what your audience is in the context of why you're taking this class, why you've been a part of this group. Maybe your audience is as a teacher, and that audience would be the students. Maybe your audience is working at a center and running programs, so your audience is those participants. Maybe your audience, the number one audience you should all have is yourself. We don't often think about ourselves as an audience, but when we're talking to ourselves in our head, that's the audience we're addressing. So listening to audience and responding to what they're saying, and not necessarily what's already out there. And that's really where a lot of the programs that I've been lucky enough to start and be a part of through April, through the centers that I work in, those all started as responding to audience, not saying, oh, we're funded for this, so then we're going to do this program. It was, this is what the audience is telling us, and this is what we're going to do to respond to that need. Are there any questions around that or comments? All right, Sapphire, I wanted to, did you have anything to add before we get to our question?
You are muted, my friend.
Always happens what?
Yeah.
No, I don't. You pretty much held it on the head.
Okay, right on. So, and that is to say, so, part of audience-based programming is recognizing patterns. So a lot of it's listening, and listening doesn't always happen in a survey. So I know it's very popular, and there is a space for that in, making out a survey and saying, hey, what do you want? Let's fill out this little doodle monkey or whatever, online platform we want. But that's, you only get at part of what people are dealing with. Oftentimes where you notice patterns is in the unofficial times. So I know through our program base at Summit, we do a lot of things. We have programs. Some of our most popular programs are a video game night, where we for 4 hours we invite people from the community with and without disabilities to come and experience video games, everything from, you know, an Atari all the way to the newest platforms. We have board games, we have role-playing games, we have Dungeons and Dragons. Uno is always a very popular thing. We have a yoga program, we have a healthy relationship program, and that's really where, and as a youth coordinator, I'm participating the entire time. And having conversations about everything from you know, what's going on day to day, to who's the best Madden player, to, you know, who has the strongest Pokemon. And that's really where you'll start, after time, as time passes, people will start to bring the real issues to forefront. You'll start to notice that so and so keeps talking about, you know, how they would love to be in a relationship and how they're shy about being on a dating website or worried about it. And then, oh, maybe somebody else brought that up when we were playing Dungeons and Dragons. So as a gatekeeper, your job is not only to create space where people feel comfortable sharing those kinds of things, but your responsibility is also to notice those patterns in what's being said, and, you know, kind of have your finger on that pulse. And then that's how you start generating, you get with other people, you know, with that title, and you start recognizing patterns. You know, this isn't just happening at game night in Montana. This is because I am attached to April. I know this from Sapphire. You know, representation is also being a conversation that she's been a part of all the way on the eastern side of the country. So now that we know that conversation is happening in multiple places, how do we design programming around it? So the question that we have for y'all in this, around this, is what are those conversations when we talk about that? What are those conversations that you're hearing in your spaces that we're not necessarily talking about as a community? You don't see it on the agenda. You don't, you know, it doesn't appear on, you know, an email heading, but you've noticed, like, this is what the communities I identify with are talking about, and we're not addressing. Is there anything that comes to mind? And Sapphire, I know you have some examples, and maybe some ways to get the conversation started.
So when we thought about this question, it kind of took me back to, like, remembering this is how, like, programs like this begin in a way, in terms of, like, as youth and, like, as a community coming into independent living a little bit and, like, trying to get our voice heard, we see issues that, like, not everybody sees. And like that's how conversations happen, and, like, that's how change happens. The most common one I recently thought about was how marriage equality was not a big conversation in terms of disabled marriage equality. When same-sex marriage was passed, like, Abby, what year was that? I'm blanking.
I was in grad school. I think it was like 2016.
That sounds right. Thank you. So when same-sex marriage passed in 2016, there was still a very big issue about disability marriage equality, and how for a person with a disability to get married, they have to give up their benefits and for some people that also means giving up your your like social security check from which was their only income. So like those conversations usually happened around the table of their home, or like with their family members, or like with their friends in the community they were in. And now, a week ago, we had a hunch about it on in Washington D.C. So like that's how we get these topics on the forefront, and it's by talking about it and like continuing to talk about it. So with that being said, like, are there anything that like it doesn't even have to be like within your community of people, but just with you, like are there topics you see as important that like you want to bring to the forefront as an issue?
Yeah. And I see in the chat, Chica, correct me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, said dating. And so I definitely recognize that. That's a pattern and something I hear a lot in some informal settings all the time. So does anybody else agree or want to add to dating being a community issue that we're not necessarily talking about in an effective way right now?
I have a huge soapbox about this actually, but I want not me to contribute before I go on my soapbox.
Okay, is anybody not Abby want to get up on that soapbox before they do?
I have a relationships and dating related soapbox for disability, because I feel like I have seen like healthy relationships kind of content, and it's heavily focused on the prevalence of interpersonal violence for folks with disabilities, that we experience that at higher rates than other populations, and that's important to know, but I don't think that gets at the why. And like the ableism of like trying to date as a disabled person has to be some of the why, and that never gets discussed. Or at least it's something that is playing into that, if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think I like your soapbox is very familiar. I think the it's not that people haven't tried to address dating and healthy relationships, but it's almost like, and I think this relates to what you just brought up. It's almost like they try to address it without really addressing it. And there's a lot of fear behind the people running the program that they're going to offend somebody, or that, let's talk about sex, but not actually talk about sex. And those kind of issues, or let's talk about the effect without talking about the cause. I think that's another pattern I see in when people do make that attempt. So thank you for sharing that. And we have a lot of soapboxes coming in. So let's try to, anybody that wants to add to the dating and healthy relationships part of it, let's start there. And then I would love to hear as many of people's soapboxes as possible. Because I guarantee you're not the only person with that box. I see Ryan's hand up. Ryan, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think, bear with me because I feel like I potentially don't fully understand the structure of what exactly.
There is no structure, so.
But I think one of the problems that I've seen people run into in terms of dating and relationships with a disability is, in a world where, people of our generation are, more than 50% are meeting like online, which is a very visual, typically very visual oriented thing, you know, especially if you're using one of the popular kind of dating apps. There's a lot of grief about whether or not if you have something that isn't particularly visible, if you should, you know, disclose that, if you should like mention it somewhere, or, you know, worries like if you have it visible, like it's gonna be like a, you know, an instant no for a lot of people, just because of the, you know, worries about maybe people's internalized feelings toward people with disabilities. So I know that's a problem that I've heard a lot of people talk about, especially people that have disabilities that can't be that can't necessarily be covered up. Like I have a prosthetic leg, and like if I don't want that to be known to someone, I can wear pants, right? And my gait is relatively natural, so usually people wouldn't know. But my friends that have that use wheelchairs, right? If they want to make a dating profile, like people are going to know that they use a wheelchair, you know, instantaneously, right? So it's not something that they can choose to disclose or not. You know, they don't have that choice. They just have to kind of put themselves out there and hope that people are not going to see only the chair. They're going to see, you know, the person.
Absolutely. Well put, well stated. And I've definitely heard that and experienced that myself. When I was, you know, out there in the dating pool. Because even if you can hide it on a profile picture, like if you end up, you know, setting up a date in person, like is that going to be a surprise? And is that like setting you up for success or that person? So, and to add on to this dating piece, it is one of those goals that is fundamentally a part of being a human being. But it's almost like it's not okay. People are shy to, it's okay to talk about my employment goal openly. It's okay to talk about my recreation goal openly and all these other goals, but somehow, you know, it's a secret to talk about the fact that dating is a goal and a relationship is a goal that you have. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Anybody else before we turn it over to Abby on relationships, dating, those kind of issues? All right, Abby. And then after Abby at Sapphire, I know you're really got your pulse on that chat. So after Abby, we'll throw it to you to include some of those conversations in what we're doing.
So prior to working at April, I worked for an agency as a music therapist. And I was working in adult day programming, which is basically, you know, a congregate care setting where disabled adults would go and spend their days and, you know, would work on various goals, do different like social activities, whatever. And one of the things that finally pushed me over the edge to start looking for a new job and to end up here at April is because I was so sick and tired of listening to non-disabled adults tell a bunch of adults that their like dating behavior or, you know, like intimate relationship behavior was inappropriate. Like just the infantilization, the way that we treat especially disabled adults who have higher support needs is disgusting. Like, for example, I knew these two folks who were dating each other and they dated for years. They're still together as far as I know, and they've been together for years. The gentleman in this relationship is blind. As far as I know, he has very little residual sight, if any. And the woman in the relationship is deaf. And they have basically one shared sense that they can communicate with, which is touch. And they found each other and they love each other. And like, heck, if I know how it happened, but that's none of my business. because I'm not either one of them. And
Right.
so one day I come to work and I find out that somebody's saying, "Oh, you know, John and Jane, they're not we don't want them holding hands in the hallways or like, you know, sitting with their arm around each other when they're at." And I'm like, "Are you like, do you people
Yeah.
have shit for brains? Like
Yeah.
what is wrong with you?"
Right.
Like, first of all, it's not like they're, you know, engaging in anything that's actually inappropriate. Like, it's not like they're, you know, feeling each other up in the room, or like he can't see her and she can't hear him. So
Yeah.
how is it that you would like them to communicate with each other? Like what?
Exactly.
And it was just so, and finally somebody who was a lot calmer than I was pointed this out to the person in charge of the program who had made this decision. And she goes, oh yeah. You know, I hadn't thought of that. Oh my God, I quit. I'm quitting. I'm walking out the door right now. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And so the infantilization of adults with disabilities makes me want to tear my hair out of my head and then set it on fire and then burn down the whole institution with the resulting fire. Like,
Absolutely.
that's my soapbox.
Yeah.
I'm
You
gonna
know, I'll bring the sticks and the marshmallows.
yeah.
We'll just, because it is like in the story you described, Abby. That was the exact that is a relationship that we should be celebrating, and not discouraging. So having the exact opposite reaction to something like that. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you everybody for that. Sapphire, I want to check in. I know you have been monitoring the chat. I know there's at least one separate soapbox I saw pop up. So
Okay, I'm good. So there were a few topics in the chat. Hold on, I'm sorry, I'm reading where I'm going.
yes, sir.
One was loneliness and apartment prices. Other one was how we should study youth with disability, and ask the youth, how do we connect with youth instead of asking parenting questions and giving youth the ability to give their own answers. I found that pretty interesting. And somebody said, hold on, sorry, I'm scrolling. It was, somebody said, I have a soapbox on a separate topic for a separate class. Found that funny. And then one topic that I kind of want to touch on, but I'm not sure if we have time, is the focus on enabled relationships and border obsession.
I mean, we have we have close to an hour left.
Erica?
So yeah, if you want to, could you repeat it? My internet connection. What was the last one?
Hold up, I'm about to put in the chat, but it's Erica put in the chat. The focus of enabled relationships borders on obsession.
Okay. And I love it when I'm not, I hear something I'm not familiar with, so I can be educated.
And like, I mean, I'm not familiar with that either, so.
Yeah. And Eric, if you want to share more, Erica, that would.
Okay. I mean, all of the time I see articles on the internet of a non-disabled person and a disabled person dating, and it's like people love those stories so much, to such a weird degree, and it just bothers me because I'm like, they don't do that when it's two non-disabled people or even when it's two disabled people. Like, it's just very bizarre that people love to look at those relationships and talk about them. I just don't like it.
Oh, Erica, I think there's a subject to be talked about there. I think there's some great stories. I think there's some humor in there. Something that I realize I've seen a lot of and experienced is especially non-disabled parents or parents of people with disabilities or adults around it. They will always try to match people with the same disabilities romantically with each other. Like somehow the fact that two people have CP automatically makes them likely a good romantic match, or two people that use a wheelchair are going to fall in love because they both have wheelchairs. And the education that I remember getting early on from my friends was like, it's kind of the opposite. Like, not that there isn't people with the same disabilities that end up falling in love, but logistically, a lot of times it just doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you have like a quad doesn't want to be in, romantic with another quad, because now we have to involve like two paraeducators. And just, yeah, I think the people fall in love with the idea and they romanticize these stories. But when you're living that experience, it's a very different story. And I think, thank you for adding that. I know Andy had a separate topic that he wanted to bring up, so now might be a great time to hear that one if you're still wanting to share, Andy.
Yeah, so going back to the kind of origin question of what's a community issue that you've learned through listening that's going on in conversations in the community. And so in my very localized community, via location, a challenge that me and my coworker really noticed was that a lot of people have where the act of identifying as having a disability is a huge barrier to getting services for assisting them with the challenges they have in their life that would often be labeled as a disability. I don't know if that made sense. Me and Sequoia are actually doing a whole presentation of it April at the conference. But so basically, a lot of services require you to say, I have a disability in order to get services. And so many people with disabilities, especially in our community, don't see themselves as being disabled or having a disability because they have a very set and narrow definition of what having a disability means. And so we as a SIL have really taken it on trying to figure out how we can help folks who are in that early stages of their disability journey, because that was such a big barrier.
Yeah. And just quickly to go off that, Andy, if you were done. I can't wait. Hopefully I get to I'll be at April. I would love to sit in on that presentation. Because something I talk about quite a bit, in our communities, we say a lot, we are the largest minority group in the world as people with disabilities, because we exist in all different communities. But what we don't often talk about, but we all recognize, is that one thing that differentiates us between other minorities is, by and large, we are a minority group that nobody, including us, wanted to be a part of. As proud and comfortable and excited as we feel now, that we know, like, everybody on this Zoom has experienced the magic and the culture that exists. We weren't always in that space. I know I wasn't. There was a long time I walked down the halls of my school with my little hand up in my sleeve, because and anytime my parents had really good intentions of, oh, this is a program, this is a sports program for kids with disabilities. The fastest I ever run in my life was away from that program. Because we don't always find, especially early on, if we were born with it or early on in acquiring a disability, we don't necessarily find comfort in our community. We find discomfort because somehow we feel more isolated if we're around other people with disabilities from the communities we're trying to be a part of. I can't wait to learn more about how your center is working through that. I know in the base program, what we've found a lot of is we have programming that is open to everyone. So it isn't an improv class for people with disabilities. It's an improv class for anybody in that community. We just happen to be offering it through our center. And in doing that, we've kind of overlapped. Like if we, in bringing in improv teachers, like if you take the Venn diagram that is artists and the Venn diagram that is people with disabilities, there's a whole lot of overlap in there. So a lot of the people that entered our program from the artist perspective, when they find themselves in a space where it's okay to disclose, and 6 months later, they end up saying, oh yes, like I've had a learning disability my whole life. And that's a whole population we never would have seen at our center had we not created that space, and they just kind of organically discovered it. So completely relate to and understand what you're saying, Andy. Does anybody else want to chime in off of what Andy laid out there, or ideas, questions they have around that?
I feel part of it is that we don't. I feel part of it is what you were saying, Mike, but I feel part of it is also our community isn't out there like other communities are, in terms of, for I'm gonna use this as an example. In terms of women, you can find women empowerment groups anywhere. You just have to look. LGBTQ, you can find those empowerment groups pretty much anywhere. You just have to look. Race, ethnicity, again, you can find them anywhere. You just have to look. But with disabilities, you can't find them anywhere. You have to create them yourself. And I feel that is what makes it so hard to identify as disabled, because as kids, we're thrown in the shark and told to learn how to swim. We have to learn ourselves how to integrate with other disabled people when you don't have other disabled people in your family. And like sometimes it does this thing to where you're like, I don't even want to be here anymore. So like, you gotta retrain your brain that, and retrain your brain to learn what a community is really supposed to look like, and then go and find that community. And the problem with the disability community again is we don't know where to look. And like, I feel like for people that I feel like people need to see what's possible in that community to say, this isn't a burden, and like take that journey on their own.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sapphire. A couple things to jump from that lily pad. I think something I've been marinating on a lot in the last few months is language. So not in the sense of the like I speak English or I speak Spanish, but the language you have to describe what you want. So for us as people with disabilities, a lot of times it's not that we don't know what we want or we don't know what we feel. It's that we don't have the language to describe that yet. So that's why, you know, when you find yourself in that space, like Sapphire described, you finally, you know, search through the darkness and find that space you've been looking for, whether it's an April class like this one or the conference or a YLF or any, you know, thing like that. Once you find it, you're like, yes, this is the language that I was searching for. And now I can describe it. But before that, if somebody said, what are you looking for? You're like, I know I'm looking for something, but I cannot begin to describe it to you. In another context, like when we work with young people, both being those young people and then working with them, you know, we even like we kind of poke fun. Like everybody wants you say, what do you want to be for? What do you want your job to be? What do you want your career to be? And you'll get 8 out of 10 students saying, I want to be a video game tester or I want to be a YouTube star. And you're like, oh, these are the only answers I'm getting. But you know, what I've thought about recently after doing this for so many years, part of the reason that's the only answer we're getting is that's the only language that those students have. Whereas other people might have a language that includes failure in band and trying, you know, different sports and doing this and that and everything. So by the time they get to that age where they're looking at employment, you know, they can say, these are the things, this is the language that I've compiled to say what I want. Our experience isn't that. Our experience very often is isolation and doctor's appointments and poverty. And so, of course, we're going to say YouTube star because it's free. And we're going to say video game tester because that's the outlet we found for fun when we haven't been able to do other things. So in terms of community, yeah, a lot of times we don't have the language to describe what we're missing, but we just know we have that feeling that there's more out there that we want to access. So by extension, this beginnings of these conversations hopefully is developing all our language. Like hopefully our language to describe is deeper at 6 o'clock than it was at 4 o'clock when we started. And I know just listening to some of what y'all have had to say, my language is deeper for it. So Jordan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say what you were saying about, like, first of all, I'm a big word nerd. I think if I could like study again, I would just go into linguistic anthropology or something. So with this identity, like self-identifying, and being in a medicalized body, like from a very young age, I could tell someone like all the things that happened to have a disability and like the medical terms of that, but didn't identify with I'm a disabled person until I was like 17, 18. So in the meantime, I'm just going off spouting random medical facts to anybody that has the gall to say what's wrong with you. You know, and not even like, I mean, this was a stranger thing, but like the thing I wonder about if self-identifying is a barrier to accessing center services, how does that impact folks? Like we've heard tonight that lots of folks are still pursuing diagnosis and they may not have medical documentation to show disability. So what they have is their word and their identity, that language. And that's not good enough for a lot of other providers, but it's good enough at a center. So I don't know. That's a tricky one to figure out.
It is, and I would point out too, and I'm glad you brought that up from a center perspective, because that's part of our sales pitch, right? Is independent living. We're not voc rehab. We're not Social Security. We don't need you to have a doctor's note that says, I have this diagnosis and this is how it impacts me on my worst day. It's a big selling point. So you, if as long as you self-identify with disability, you can access our programming. I think something that we're not, as long as we're talking about issues that we're not focusing on enough. I personally, my experience included, think that centers do a really good job of saying that. I don't always know that centers for independent living do a good job living up to that. So are we, when we say we're cross disability, are we actually cross disability in our programming? Or are we only focusing on certain things? So you don't need a diagnosis, but if you walk in and you say, I don't have a diagnosis, or I'm in the process of being diagnosed, is there a program that really is going to cater to what you need in that moment? And the answer for some centers is yes, but I don't think there is enough centers that really focus on that category of people in that that are in the process of maybe falling through a crack. So I see Enora, have your hand up, so go ahead.
Yes. So I was gonna piggyback off that language. Like if somebody wants to be like a game tester or like something that requires at home, also thinking about their immune system too. Like for me personally, I have an autoimmune disorder, so I get sick very easily. So one thing that made work hard for me was that I was always sick. So like having an at-home job is like the dream. But like if they wanted to do that, looking into like how can they do that? If that's what they really want to do, looking into, okay, well, how can we set you up to do that? Or can we research algorithms and how to best do that? Like there's always ways to do it too.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that perspective. So one very quick anecdote before we get on to some other stuff, because we want to, Sapphire and I talked about too, but we want to take some of this conversation and really like leave here today thinking about what can this group set as a goal? Like, are there any of these things that this group can take on and start talking about in a meaningful way and set goals for? Or are there things that we brought up today that, you know, like Andy brought up, these are localized things that it may not fit the container that is this group right here, but I might have something more locally that I can use to address this. But in terms of language, Mary Olson Willard, who's the training and technical director for April, who many of you know, you'll meet. Her and I worked for years together at the same center, developing programming. And there was one time we were in a classroom and we were talking to a student, and it was a student who had a developmental disability. And we were asking everybody, what is your dream job? Not the job that you think is responsible, like what's your dream? And this young person brought up race car driver. And luckily the teacher was like standing behind them, so the student didn't see them roll their eyes. But every time we asked this over 2 years, the only answer they ever had, race car driver. And realistically, getting a driver's license was going to be a major barrier, but attainable for this student. So, but being a race car driver was, you never want to say no. And Mary didn't. Mary was like, all right, what is it you like about race car driving? Is it the speed? And they're like, no, I don't like going fast. I'm like, really? You want to be a race car? And rather than shutting down that conversation, Mary asked like 4 questions. And what it boiled down to was this student didn't want to be a race car driver. This student loved the colors of the cars and the bright paint and the design. So just by keeping that conversation going, we were able to set them with a job shadow at like an auto detailing, like design paint shop. And they ended up being there for like 6 months and having an internship. So that is to me, is a great example of that language. The only language they had for years was race car driver. So it's not, but that's not what they wanted to do, but that's the only way they had to express it. So part of our job is expanding that language. So maybe it isn't video game designer, maybe it's coding, but you don't have the language to say that yet. So yeah, it's definitely something that is worth talking about. All right, is there anybody else in the chat? Sapphire, how are we doing there?
Nope, there is no, like I did. No, sorry. Jaden said, telling you what you want to hear, so to speak, and I think that comment came from when we were talking about. Sorry, I'm trying to remember. Audio memory sucks.
It was when we were talking about how sills talk the talk, but don't
walk the walk.
Walk the walk, so to speak, when we talk about, oh, we're a cross disability space. That's another soapbox that I could go on, but we don't have time for that. So if anybody wants to hear if anybody wants to hear that soapbox another time, please let me know. Okay,
but that also, without going into your personal soapbox, Abby, plays into something that Sapphire and I talked about so these might seem like revolutionary ideas and brand new things and patterns that independent living hasn't ever thought of. And some of them are, but what we really have to remember is it's not as far away from where we started as we think. So independent living centers were not always federally funded. We didn't always have a 704 report. We didn't always have Sill Suite. We didn't even have jobs. Independent living started out with conversations like this. It started out between young people, primarily of college and early 20s age, sitting in dorm rooms and complaining about professors and complaining about lack of access and dreaming about dating and having a job and living outside in the community. So we are a movement born of audience-based programming. So our answer going into the future of IL very much still exists in our past. And I think, part of what, April can be a gatekeeper in, and myself, as somebody that's been in it a long time, is reminding those directors, those boards, those people that, have the say of what program we go after and what program we don't, is giving them back a language and reminding them, no, this isn't radical. This is where we started. This is who we are. This is who Judy was. This is who Ed was. This is who Linda Gonzalez, who was the first director of April, and who, and that, one of the biggest things that April ever gave to me came from our second director, Billy Alton, my first conference. It wasn't a pamphlet he gave me. It wasn't a program. He said, he invited me to sit next to him in the lounge, and he was playing his guitar, and he sat me down and he said, hey, whatever Mike needs, get it to him, because he's with us. And that's just who he is. It didn't mean, he didn't know what those 3 words meant, how much they meant to me when I was 21, because he was all about creating community and inviting people in. But for me at 21, never having felt a part of a community, having somebody I thought was that cool say, you're with us, was one of the biggest things that I've ever gotten out of independent living. And it's not a core service. It's not something you can put in So Sweet, but it is powerful. So it is very much a part of who we are. And if you, going forward in your goals, run into somebody that needs to be reminded of that, you can have our contact information. I'm happy to call people. I'm happy to be that mirror that says, no, this is who we are. So we got about half an hour left. Let's check the outline that Sapphire and I made and see where we're at. And while I'm looking at that, let's everybody collectively give yourselves a round of applause for this conversation and these ideas, and yeah, just the heart that you all have shown in addressing some of these issues. Okay, so in going forward, Sapphire and I also wanted to touch on, so we've given you some examples of how, like this, a lot of the programs I talk about at BASE started out as these conversations. The fact that April has the youth programs they have right now over the last, 2 decades started out as these conversations. So Sapphire and I wanted to talk about what it takes once you've identified these patterns, and once you start having these, like what are the next steps in making them tangible change? And part of that, and Sapphire, you brought this up I immediately identified with it as a barrier, or as as a boundary that I haven't always had with myself. And you talked about the idea that once you identify these patterns and you want to make these changes, you as an advocate don't have to be everything. And so could you expand on that, Sapphire, and what you meant?
So this summer, I got the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and be a cohort for the American Association of People with Disabilities. And one class we had, and one thing that really stuck out to me was the presenter said, when you're in a movement or when you want to make change, you don't have to be everything, in terms of you don't have to be an expert on everything. There's going to be one person for every role, and that one person may only be an expert in their disability and how their disability is like impacted by this issue. And that's okay, because then you're gonna meet somebody else with a different disability, and like that's where listening and like audience-based communication and like the patterns coming at, because you guys are gonna chat and like you guys are gonna realize it's not just a issue you have, it's issues they have as well, and so on and so on. So you don't have to be everything. If you're good at researching or good at talking to people, then that can solely be your job on the team. You don't have to wear every hat. It's tiring, it's exhausting, and it won't get the job done.
Right. Thank you. And 2 things I'll add to that, Sapphire. Thank you for setting it up so beautifully. Is one, like it's a stronger, more powerful change if it's more than one person. So you're not just recognizing that you can't be everything. It's recognizing that the change isn't going to be sustainable or as impactful if it's just dependent on one person. Even if that one person is the most righteous person in the world, if everything crumbles because they're not able to be there for a week or a day, then it's not meaningful change. And that's why we brought up also what else do you identify other than disability? So myself, for example, identifying as an entertainer and a comedian, that's something I bring as a talent and a perspective to every disability issue I address. So that's an asset. So these aren't just communities we also identify with, they're assets that we bring to disability issues. And our community is stronger because we're not just showing up as Michael Beers with a little dinosaur hand. I'm showing up as my diagnosis and a Native American and somebody who knows what it's like to be adopted and somebody who, can tell a story and move a crowd. Even if I can't do a budget or don't know how to work an Excel sheet, other people bring those talents to the forefront. So that's what you look for when you start creating a team. And we have a question that we want to ask. But before we do that, does anybody have any personal experience with the idea that you don't have to be everything, or we're stronger because we're not everything? Or any questions around that?
I work with a young woman who is like 1,000,000,000% convinced that she has to save the world. And she's the only one who can do it. And every time we talk, I'm just like, my dude, it does not have to be this way. Nor should it be. And I'm waiting for the time that she realizes that that's not the case. But I think so often young people with disabilities get pigeonholed into or even I think folks in any marginalized group, it's like somebody in class brings up that thing about LGBT stuff, and then all of a sudden you've got I've got 30 pairs of eyes staring at me because it's like, oh, that's Abby, she's the gay one. Or so-and-so sitting over there in their wheelchair and somebody says something about disability and we're all looking now, and so part of why we started this program is because we wanted to create more and more young leaders. So y'all had less pressure on yourselves to be the only ones, because so often we would go to say, oh, we need a young person to do this thing. And then it'd be like, all right, time to call the same 5 people. And those 5 people are so great. And we love those 5 people, but we want there to be more than 5, because if I ask those same 5 people to do things forever, they're going to run out of time. They're going to run out of energy, and they're going to be sick of my calling, and they're going to burn out. And we don't want that, because none of us burning out sucks, and nobody deserves that.
No, and it makes you, eventually, you become a bigger part of the problem because you're burnt out than you ever were part of the solution. And I think that also goes back to language. There's the language that and the vibration that we have as an individual, and putting yourself out there to groups like this, and not everybody's going to speak your language, and that's amazing. But in having these conversations, in having these informal spaces, you will run into people that you identify with, and you'll be like, oh, that person speaks my language. And now all of a sudden it's not just me speaking that language, it's me and this person. So, and that can happen intersectionally, that can happen intergenerationally, that can happen in all kinds of different ways that you don't expect when you start putting yourself out there and networking in different communities. So as a practical example of that, when I started at my center, there was a lot of, I was given a lot of leeway because no youth programming had ever been done, and somebody my age had never been an employee there. So a lot of these just started as things I was comfortable with and ideas that I had. But like Abby described, I felt burnt out by that pretty quickly. But then along comes a few years in, along comes a Mary Olson, who gets hired at the center, and just by having conversations in the car from like one training to another or one conference to another, we identified with the language each other spoke. So now it was Mary and I speaking a language that could create programming. And then a few years later, we get invited to go to the North Carolina Youth Leadership Forum, and there's a Sierra Royster who had been in her job for 2 weeks and had no idea what was going on, but had all the ideas and the heart and everything. So we were brought in to help her like understand what a youth leadership forum could be. And yeah, all of a sudden in North Carolina, we found another individual that is speaking a similar language. So now there's 3 of us that can, take those different talents, but that same language and apply it to programming, where just one of us speaking that language would never have been able to accomplish the things the 3 of us. So in this arena, in the April arena that some of you will be in a couple of weeks, be on the lookout. Open your ears. You're gonna run into people that are speaking that same language that you're thinking in your head, and those are the people you add to your team. And they may come from the most unexpected places. They might be 40 years older than you. They might be on a completely different side of the country. But there is that community that you will run into if you're paying attention to it. So the question we wanted to get to in creating this team that can start addressing some of these issues that we're not talking about, and these community patterns that we're identifying, is what role, and this is an open-ended question, there is no right or wrong answer. The right answer is that we're talking about it. And as an advocate, that's a very important lesson. There's very rarely a this is right, this is wrong. We only get that when we turn on the news or we listen to politicians. Generally, the right answer is that we're talking about it, not that someone is right or wrong. So to that end, the question that we pose to you, and Sapphire and I have talked about, and we'll share our opinions, in creating a team to address these disability issues, what, if any, are the roles of allies? So an ally would be somebody that might speak a similar language, but is going to be outside of the disabled community. So they're going to be an able-bodied person that has a heart or an inspiration around our issues. What, if any, role do they play in making the changes we want to see in our community? And if that doesn't make sense or we need to elaborate, let us know that too as well. Ryan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, for what it's worth, we recently had a discussion about this in my current job. We have a program at Amputee Coalition called the Lead Advocate Program, where it's basically a training that we have people go through, and the idea is that they are kind of advocacy leaders in their community. And we had kind of an internal discussion on whether or not we wanted to move that program from being something that was open to everybody to exclusive to people who had some sort of limb loss or limb difference.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a really bad idea. I thought that was a really, really negative idea and would be a very negative development if it were to come to pass. Largely from a strategic point of view, they're just there is a strength in numbers. I think a lot of movements that have taken steps to excise people that don't fit into the community that's being advocated for have failed or have been less effective than their counterparts that did allow people who were not part of the community to be advocates. So, I mean, I think, you know, obviously the most important voices in any movement are obviously going to be, or are always going to be the people who are directly affected. And that shouldn't change. But I think removing people from advocacy spaces just because they don't fit the community is a bad idea. I think that's would be a very negative development. You don't need to have a disability to have empathy.
Yeah, right on. I like that. Way to bring it home, Ryan. Thank you for kicking off the discussion. I might get the order wrong, but I also see Lavender and Andy. So let's
It
start with
was
Lavender and then
Naomi,
Andy.
then Lavender, then Andy.
Oh, okay, Sapphire's on top of it. Go ahead. What was that order again, Sapphire?
Naomi, then Lavender, then Andy.
All right, thank you. All right, Naomi.
Yeah, I kind of want to go off of what Ryan said in terms of like ally. I always cringe when I hear like an ally of disabilities just because I've had so many negative experiences in that field. But I would say I had a really good friend of mine who was able to help me as an actual ally in terms of moving kind of disability pride forward in education. We've known each other for almost a decade now. And what really helped was having empathy and also being able to be breaking down those barriers. Whenever we were in a space together, whether it was volunteer or working, she was able to kind of like break the barriers by just, I know sounds like very simple, but treating me as like a normal, equalized person in a space. And so other people was like, oh, okay, we can ask these questions, like, oh, we can talk about this, and then no, it's not weird. And so in terms like of a role, she has always been like the person to like start like breaking down the barriers in terms of like, let's talk about it rather than just stare awkwardly and not say anything for like 5 to 10 minutes. So in that regard, I think it's really good to have those allies and those people around you to really help move that forward. And also, my friend recently pointed out, you can work with everyone. No one is like grouped out or like everyone's subjective and everybody's included. So we should all work together as one voice and start creating change together as one community rather than like dividing into our own communities. So I thought that was really cool. So yeah, that's my little spiel.
Hey, thank you, Naomi. Who's up next, Sapphire?
Lavender.
Allyship, I think when we talk about allyship, my perspective on it is that a good ally is there to do what the members of the community are asking them to do. If you are an ally, that doesn't mean that you can't be an advocate. You certainly can be an advocate, but your voice should not be the loudest in the room on the issue. You are certainly free to speak about the issue, but at the same time, you should be uplifting the voices of the actual community members, and what you are saying should match what they are saying. And I'm also thinking about what allyship looks like for the queer and trans community, because we also have a lot of conversations about what that A means in LGBTQIA plus, whether that A is just for the A-spec community or if that also includes allies. And I don't think that in order to be a good ally, you need to push for a seat at the table. But I think as much as they can, a good ally should be there to listen. And I think it's interesting when we talk about like empathy, because I think in some cases an ally could probably empathize, but really what we need them to do is sympathize, because that's the whole point. They can't empathize. They do not share our experiences, so inherently they do not understand. But we need them to do their best to understand and to trust us to make the decisions in our advocacy for ourselves that are the best for us, and like to trust us and to let us stay in the driver's seat. Because so often when we talk about any marginalized community, what happens with privilege is the power gets taken away. So a good ally is there to make sure that the power stays in the hands of the actual community.
Well said. Thank you, Lavender. Sapphire, who we got next? And we have about 7 minutes left, so just to keep people mindful of the time. All right.
Sorry, Mike.
No, yep, go ahead.
I just want to say that everyone said really awesome things. For me, there's kind of a phrase that kind of sticks in my head that I once heard, which is, if you're here to fight for me, you're not needed. But if you're here because ultimately your fate is connected and dependent on on our liberation, then let's fight together. I'm probably butchering that quote. But basically the concept is that people who are wanting to be allies and advocates alongside our movement ultimately have some reason that they're wanting to be a part of it. People aren't just jumping in because, oh, that looks fun. Advocacy work's hard work. And so as a movement, learning why they're at the table and just kind of
an unintentional unmute.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and so learning those connections as to why allies want to be at the table or be a part of the movement is really a beautiful connection and really builds to that team of knowledge and experiences that Michael was referring to earlier.
Thank you, Ann. And I'll just add a couple of my thoughts on it. And my thoughts are always evolving. I think one of the things to point out too, and I don't know if I misquote it, I think it was Lavender brought up, that these are issues around allies is also something that the queer community and LGBT plus A community brings up. So, and in having those conversations, understanding that an ally for one movement and how they define it and see a role for that inherently won't be the same as it is in other spaces, and it doesn't have to be. Even within disability spaces, I think, an ally, what an ally is, or the importance of what that label can mean, has to constantly evolve. It can't be a printed definition that we put in a book and then never revisit. You almost have to revisit it with every single issue. And you can't just, say, this is what an ally always is, and this is what an ally always isn't, because that's not the world we live in. you know, when I think about allyship, and I brought this up and when I was on the April board, and people might be familiar with this, they may not be, but it's the 51-49 rule. In an independent living center, April's board, 51% of employees and board members have to have a disability. And that means that disability voices are always in the majority in decision making. And I think that's beautiful. But I've been in spaces where in like centers and groups brag, oh yeah, we're 90%, you know, we're 100% people with disabilities. And I really don't think that serves us well. I think that as comfortable and as cool as we might feel in that space, we lose connection with what our goal is. So if we're not having 49% of the community that's not us involved in the conversation, how do we know how to be a part of that community outside of who we are? And isn't equity for people with disabilities kind of the umbrella that we're all under? So yes, we always have to be that majority voice, and a lot of you brought that up, but you know, 49-51 should be the goal, not the barrier that we put up, you know, because it keeps us in touch with that community that we're ultimately trying to be a part of. And if we get too far away with that, from that, we've segregated ourselves, instead of other people doing it for us, which historically is the case. So again, this is an evolving conversation, and I'm so happy to be a part of it with all of you, because this movement has never had you and is never going to have you again. So while we have you, it's a very powerful place to be. Sapphire, I saw your hand up, and we're getting right about at that time. So
no, I just saw the clock. I didn't want to say that very quickly.
Oh yeah, no, please put a bow on it for us.
I just wanted to remind you guys, allyship isn't a whole disability community thing. Sometimes disabled people are allies to other disabled people. I'm sorry, my phone keeps ringing. Sometimes disabled people are allies to other disabled people. That don't mean you know exactly what I go through with CPE, but that doesn't mean also that you're not gonna support me even though you have a different disability. So like that's how like I think of allyship. I don't just think of non-disabled people, I think of disabled people as allies as well, because you don't know, not everybody know what having CP is like, but I'm pretty sure if there was issues surrounding CP, you guys will be there to support me just like the non-disabled people will.
Yeah.
Allyship isn't just a whole disability community thing. Sometimes it's within our own disabilities as well that we need allies from other disabled people.
Wow. Okay, Sapphire. Like, yeah, okay. That's a beautiful thing for us all to like, yeah, it was right there, but I've never thought of it that way. And can't unthink about it now. So thank you, Sapphire. Yeah, we're all allies within a movement because we're so diverse. Okay, cool. I don't know if Abby, if you have some closing remarks or people have last questions. If we're running out of time, but let this again be the platform that we jump from, not that we head on. So if you want to email us, get a hold of us afterwards, invite us back. Definitely if you're going to be in LA, let's keep this momentum going. But again, thank you all for inviting both of us to be a part of tonight, and we'll see you out there.
Thank you, Mike and Sapphire, for the excellent conversation. Usually we take a break during this group, but like I am shocked that it's 9 p.m. already, just because like it was really great conversation. So I'm gonna send an email to y'all like as we close with your groups for roundtables. I tried to give everybody their first or second. It is 7 p.m. for you. Yes, that's fair. I guess the better way to say it is I'm shocked that it's been 2 hours because I could have listened to everybody talk for much longer. So I'll be sending an email with your groups. I tried to make sure everybody got their first or second choice. If for some reason you see this email and you're like, oh crap, on second thought, I don't think I can make this happen, then email me, let me know, and we'll work it out. The recording will come tomorrow. If y'all have questions, concerns, anything about the conference, please give me a call. I'm traveling on Wednesday, the 4th. I'll be flying out, but I'm on JetBlue, so I got Wi-Fi. So the only day that you won't be able to get me at all is the 6th, because I will be at Disneyland and I will not be checking my phone or email while I'm at Disneyland. But between now and when you leave, if you need anything, if you have questions, concerns, anything about the conference, please reach out. If you haven't looked at the conference website already, please do that or download the conference app. There's instructions on how to do it on the conference website, which I'm going to put in the chat right now. If you haven't sent me a bio already, I will be following up in an email to get a bio so you can tell all the cool people at the April conference how cool you are. And yay. Okay, that's it. I should let our captioner go. Thank you, everybody. I will see you all in 2 weeks in person in California. Have a good night, everybody.
Have a good night, guys.